And speaking of exciting, man, next fight, we got Warlley Alves and Jeremiah Wells. Now, this is actually a replacement fight. We would have got to see Ramazan Amiev and Warlley Alves on the prelims. Can you believe that? That would have been a fun fight. But Jeremiah Wells, Philly fighter, made his name with CSC and CFFC. He actually ended up taking over as champion for CFFC after Sean Brady actually relinquished the title and moved on. And it's really interesting to see what he's done in that little bit of time. We talk about how much, Philly fighters are great in terms of strikers, such a great boxing background in Philly in general. But what I liked about his two fights heading into the UFC is he really can do it all. I thought that he was a phenomenal wrestler in his most recent fight, but then you look at the knockout that he pulled off, which was absolutely gorgeous. It earned him the title fight to, take over for Sean Brady. And that's what I liked about him. I just thought that the trajectory there was absolutely perfect. Goes and wins the title in a dominant fashion, and now gets a short notice fight in the UFC. Warlley Alves, what can we say? Terrible injury issues, man. Felt so bad for the guy. 2020 to forget. Previous fight before that was a Randy Brown loss in 2019. But then we could talk about the Munir Laziz fight, right? I'm going to be honest and say that I picked Munir Laziz only because I thought Warlley Alves would fade later in the fights like we've seen him in the past, but it didn't matter. He was able to pull off that victory fairly easily. The comeback party is in full swing, and the big thing about that fight is Warlley Alves went into it as a plus 230 dog. Really crazy when you think about the grand scheme of things, because Munir Laziz was not the most, experienced UFC fighter. Taking a guy like Warlley Alves, who has tough Brazil experience, he was very much in the come up before those big injuries, and I think that he's written the ship pretty well when it comes to what he showed us in that fight with Laziz. The ground game is obviously there, but he has power. That's the big thing with Alves. Is I think he can grapple with anybody, but the power that's in his hands is what keeps him very, very dangerous wherever the fight goes. And you think about just, the guillotines that he's landed, right? All those guillotines, probably one of his favorite moves when it comes to, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And then you look at a guy like Wells, who has a good wrestling pedigree. I mean, he showed it in his last fight, was able to roll into any of the big positions that he needed to be in. But again, another guy with big, powerful hooks. He's going to throw heavy. I think that this is a fight of two guys that very much line up well from a matchmaking perspective. And it's just interesting to see, you got the Alveses with only other losses to Brian Barberina, James Krause, and Kamaru Usman. So it's you think back, why was Warlley Alves even a plus 230 dog? It's really easy to talk about it now, but I think that this is a fight where, again, not to go against Warlley Alves, but when you look at Wells' his body of work, I mean, training-wise, training partners-wise, experience, that's all working against him, but the guy is a gamer in the biggest sense. Wherever the fight goes, he seems to really be able to move with it. And the flowiness of his wrestling game was very impressive in that title fight. So I'm interested to see if this fight goes late, if Wells can take over. If this fight goes 3 rounds, I can see Wells winning a decision, because if there's enough damage done, Warlley Alves gets pretty sloppy in the second half of fights. But early on, if he's able to avoid those big shots from Warlley, avoid the takedowns, avoid getting finished, this will be a very competitive fight. Now, like I said, we know that Jeremiah Wells is coming in here on short notice. Warlley Alves, I mean, we talk about it all the time, right? Just the lack of gas tank late in fights, but then such an explosive guy early on. Is he able to do the same thing against a guy like Wells, who seems to be very, very skilled at keeping the fight in his area where he's comfortable at his range? So that's going to make this one really fun. And as always, let's take a look at these lines real quick. You know what, man? I respect this line big time, because you talk about a guy who's coming from the regional scene and maybe not having so much to go on him. Warlley Alves still coming in as a minus 225 opener, and now sitting about a minus 230, minus 240 favorite. I thought this was a line that could very much open in the minus 300 range based on the last performance and based on Wells's, newcomer title. But when you look at Wells coming in plus 162, now moving up to a plus 190, plus 180 in that range, could close as a plus 200 depending on where the money goes. But I gotta say, it's hard to go against Warlley Alves in this fight, especially in the early parts of it. But again, I'm gonna say live bet, right? If this fight goes into the second, third rounds, it'd be interesting to see how well both these guys are faring in terms of energy. Even with this being short notice, I don't think Wells stops training. Go check his Instagram. The guy's fairly active just in general as a fighter. And so that's what makes this very interesting as a big bout. I think that it could go either way. I really do. And it all depends on what happens in the early parts of the fight. Similar to what we just said about the last one.